Hello, guys. Welcome back to Mr. Saul Talking. It's been so long, and I apologize about that. It shouldn't have been so long since I made a video, but today we will fix that problem by talking about the arms race. Oh my God, everybody has arms. Like any other video that I've done, there's going to be a couple questions. There'll be two questions at the end. Just answer those on a separate Google document. And hopefully this will be short and sweet. I got my timer going next to me to make sure I don't talk too much because I have a history of talking too much. Or so I've been told that I talk too much. So the arms race. Let's start with a basic premise here. Whoops. Let's start with a basic premise. The arms race that we're discussing refers to the Cold War, of course, the intense rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union post World War II up through the early 1990s before the collapse of the Soviet Union. But of course, arms races have occurred in world history. Arms races just refer to any serious expansion of military weapons. At any point in time, typically during peacetime, in which there isn't war. It's an attempt to gain more and more grounds on the front of weapons. And in the Cold War, of course, we're talking about nuclear weapons. And that starts really when the Cold War is originating, which is during World War II. And during World War II, despite the fact that the US and the Soviet Union are allies, there is a great deal of skepticism towards one another. We've talked about, obviously, the ideological differences and the concern about Stalin and what he was perhaps doing in Eastern Europe in establishing, communist governments throughout Eastern Europe. But, the United States is, during that time of World War II, developing the Manhattan Project. We've talked about the Manhattan Project. U.S. is the only country to ever use nuclear weapons in war on Japan in August of 1945, ending World War II. But of course, in response to that, as this rivalry between the U.S. and the Soviet Union increases post-World War II, the Soviet Union responds by developing its own atomic weapon, which then only leads to the United States investing more and more billions of dollars into nuclear technology, into making hydrogen bombs, which leads the Soviet Union to create hydrogen bomb. And this tit for tat back and forth is going to occur throughout much of the preceding decades of the Cold War. Of course, keep in mind that the nuclear bombs that we've talked about in the past were extraordinarily powerful and had unbelievable impacts on the planet and the people who were victimized by it. Hydrogen bombs are an entirely different category. It's like talking about, little leagues versus major leagues. Hydrogen bombs can be hundreds of times, 1,000 times more powerful than atomic weapons. And of course, to consider what kind of damage that can do is unfathomable when it comes to what could happen. So this chart, for example, looks at this growth of this arms race where, this is really, you see, starting in 1950, there's just this massively quick acceleration of the creation of nuclear warheads, which then is followed in the United States by the Soviet Union doing the same thing. We'll talk about when these times peak for the United States. That peaks really in the early 60s, and we'll talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis and all that it represented and what it signified to the world and to America. For the Soviet Union, it's really the late 1980s, which we'll talk about, results in some economic challenges for their country. Keep in mind that these things cost money, and whether or not that's good economically to invest billions of dollars into nuclear weapons that we are never going to actually use, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? There are some interesting consequences for both the United States and the Soviet Union. During the 1950s, this starts to really accelerate because not just of the creation of nuclear warheads, but rather how we deliver a nuclear warhead. The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were done through bombers, planes dropping those two bombs, Little Boy and Fat Man. Great names, classic America. Great sense of humor. But the United States and the Soviet Union start creating what are called ICBMs, or intercontinental ballistic missiles. Obviously, as the name implies, they are intercontinental, meaning that they would travel between continents. So if you strap a nuclear warhead to an ICBM rocket, you're now being able to deliver a payload from thousands and thousands of miles away, which makes these far more dangerous. And as the arms race is intensifying, this theory comes to light, which is referred to as mutually assured destruction, which is often just referred to as MAD. But mutually assured destruction, as the name implies, means essentially both sides, the United States and the Soviet Union, realize that because both sides have so many nukes and have such a wide range of ability to deliver these nuclear payloads, neither side will attack because there's a fear of retaliatory attack. That's not an easy word to say. So essentially, if the U.S. knows that the Soviet Union is launching an attack, right, the U.S. can immediately respond instantaneously with a counterattack, and then you have the destruction of the planet. And this fear of a retaliatory attack really prevented the United States and the Soviet Union from ever escalating to an actual war. As we'll talk about, I don't know why this is being blocked by this little thing in the corner. I can't believe it's... Can I get rid of this thing? Go away. It's not going away. The event that comes closest to nuclear war, which that says nuclear war narrowly avoided, is the Cuban Missile Crisis, which we'll talk more about, in which Soviet Union places nuclear capacities for against essentially a potential attack against the United States, only 90 miles off of the coast of Florida in Cuba. And we'll talk more about the context of that and the Castro regime in Cuba and what the United States was concerned with of a communist presence in Latin America. But that moment, as we'll talk about, really signifies this mutually assured destruction, because in the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962, the world got extremely close to nuclear war. But even in that extremely intense moment, cooler heads prevailed because of the fact that both sides, the U.S. and the Soviet Union, understood the ramifications of nuclear war, which is an interesting concept. An interesting map to consider, because it's kind of, taking our perspective and thinking a little differently. If you're looking at a map of the U.S. and the Soviet Union, Russia at the time, Russia today, the Soviet Union at the time, both countries had the ability to attack each other from numerous places. If you even look towards Europe, the United States had implanted nuclear sites in some of our alliances that we formed from NATO, and we'll talk more about countries like Turkey and Iran and why we had strategic alliances with these places during the Cold War. But part of why we had alliances with these countries and why we held troops in these countries wasn't just the threat of communism, but also the way that we could put nuclear sites there as a precaution, just in case the Soviet Union were to ever attack us. So, these are scary things to consider, but MAD was so effective, mutually assured destruction was so effective as a concept because both sides understood what could occur. The effects of all of this are complicated. I mean, for one thing, the arms race had this very weird effect of people having fear of nuclear war for obvious reason. When you develop thousands and thousands of nuclear warheads and ICBMs, and you're in this back and forth between these countries, people are going to fear nuclear war. They are going to build bomb shelters in places like the suburbs, which we'll talk more about when we talk about 1950s American culture. At the same rate, while the arms race had the effect of producing fear also drove people to build these nukes in the first place. It was that fear that led the country like the United States, and led the Soviet Union to build more and more nukes for protection, which is kind of this fascinating impact. So as I was saying, the building of bomb shelters was occurring. You also have the United States not just spending more on defense, but also spending more on national highway systems. And there were lots of reasons that the Interstate Highway Act, which we'll talk more about, was passed. But one of the interesting reasons why it was passed was as a way to create for people to get out of potential cities that could be targets of nuclear attack. So the United States government may have been investing in really good things for kind of strange reasons because of us, having this fear of nuclear attack and us building all these nuclear bombs. We're also investing in things that are good for the public, like the interstate highway system. Similarly, I can't speak today. Similarly, you guys will correct me because I can't speak. I had too much coffee. But there's also a push for science education inside public schools, which is fascinating because we wanted more and more kids learning about science and potentially working in the defense industries in nuclear technology. It's a way that we do improve schools in America, and we want more and more kids to learn about science. And we also will, as a country, start investing more into the space race. And of course, the exploration of space, that's supposed to say at the bottom, will also help improve us as a society. So it's interesting to consider that while we may think that there are many obvious harmful consequences of the arms race, there are also some strange, weird benefits the United States receives where we create systems like highways that are good for the country and good for our infrastructure. We spend money on science education, which most of us would argue is a good thing. But all of that was a production from the fears of the arms race and the fear of nuclear war and the Cold War in general, to be the better country and to win this. This photograph, of course, is of a duck and cover drill. I talked to my dad about this recently. Both my parents grew up in the 50s. And while you guys experience, things like active shooter drills because of the fear of an armed maniac breaking into a building. The fear of the Cold War was, of course, nuclear war, and children were taught to duck and cover and watched, informative videos about how to, prevent dying in a nuclear holocaust, as if a wooden desk, that was poorly made was going to protect you. Although those desks look like they're pretty solid. Anyway, I digress. If you have any questions about any things that I kind of ran through, there's a lot to talk about that's super cool about the arms race. Feel free to ask me via email or in class. But the two questions I did want you to answer. One, how is fear of nuclear war both a cause and an effect of the arms race? And then secondly, explain a major effect of the arms race other than fear. Very, very simply, I'll leave it at that. I hope you all have a good weekend. Enjoy the long weekend because you're off Monday. Remember that I don't see you until I see you Tuesday, not Monday. It's a weird week. Tuesday and Thursday I see you guys. Anyway, be safe, be well.